I'm going to cover Does Social Class Explain the Connection Between Weight and Health by Paul Ernsberger, Ph.D. Ernsberger writes, after controlling for socio-economic status, in the Americans' Changing Lives study, the relative risk for low body weight was 2.03, whereas the relative risk for high weight was 0.94. Thus, for individuals with equivalent social status, there is no significant increase in risk of death for high body mass. A relative risk of 1 indicates an unchanged probability of dying. So they found you have double the chance of dying if you are in the bottom 5% of BMI, and no increased risk if you are in the top 15% of BMI, which at the time would have been exclusively occupied by obese and extremely obese people. About 1/3 of this population would have BMIs of 40 or more, and yet they had collectively a slightly lower chance of death than normal weight people. Ernsberger writes, the low body weights associated with increased death rates were not emaciated by any means, but were at or even slightly above the recommendations of the life insurance tables. The inescapable conclusion is that underweight is a significant contributor to excess mortality once socio-economic status has been taken into account. The world's highest rates of adiposity are found in the South Pacific and in Native American groups. Yet in these non-Western cultures there is no increased risk of cardiovascular disease even at the highest weights, BMIs of up to 40. This raises the possibility that the stigma, discrimination and stress faced by obese persons of high socio-economic status in Western cultures may be a major contributor to their excess of cardiovascular mortality. According to Sizeism is a Health Hazard by Joan Crisler, a recent study demonstrated that sensitivity to race-based rejection predicts stress-related symptoms, and other studies have shown that frequent experiences of racism and sexism predict more frequent health problems. There is every reason to expect that perceived unfairness due to sizeism or sensitivity to weight-based rejection would have similar effects. So where it says experiences of racism and sexism, you can interpret that as saying perceived experiences of racism and sexism. It seems improbable that some black people would experience frequent racism when others don't experience it at all. I think it is more reasonable to think that two different black people could interpret similar experiences differently, and to not encourage people towards victimology because it is clearly bad for their health. Joan Crisler is a left-wing identity politics SJW professor, and it shows. That said, I think the discrimination against fat people is so ingrained that it is generally justified based on ignorance, so it is very real. Having done a sports science degree, this is the model I was taught. Poverty limits access to healthy food and causes fatness, and fatness causes illness. I am now convinced this model is totally inadequate. This doesn't explain why the lower classes and cultures that don't care about fatness don't experience health problems due to obesity. This is the model Ernsberger promotes. Central to the model is the well-documented link between stress and ill health. What Ernsberger also argues is that the evidence is much greater that adiposity leads to discrimination, which leads to poverty, rather than the other way round. And the degree to which fatness causes illness is in fact negligible. He mentions joint stress as an example where fatness might cause ill health. Joint stress is hardly a major problem compared to heart disease. So if you study the obesity-related scientific literature, it almost becomes metaphysical at some point. For example, a study was published in the American Journal of Public Health called I Think, Therefore I Am, Perceived Ideal Weight as a Determinant of Health, showing that perceptions of ideal weight are better at predicting health than actual body weights. Another study published in the Journal of Obesity has virtually the same conclusion. It's called Adults with Greater Weight Satisfaction Report More Positive Health Behaviors and Have Better Health Status Regardless of BMI. At some point, you have to largely abandon physical or physiological explanations and look at psychological or social explanations instead.